What is your name?
Jude.
Jude. Have we met before, Jude?
One time.
Yeah,
2 years ago.
I see. And was that here?
Yeah, roughly the same time, same month, 2 years ago.
So refresh my memory, Jude.
What I told you at that time is why I think you asked something like, what brings you here, perhaps? And I said that I'm, as best I can make of my life, I'm a lifelong student, and in many different ways. I'm a psychiatrist and a psychoanalyst.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you asked, well, what brings you here today? And I said, well, I had heard about you. And in 2000, and what I told you on that day was on 2011. Well, let me back up for a moment. I've had these things happening to me, even from a young age. First, it started with sports. I was a basketball player, and I was always going into the zone. And the zone is a very magical thing. When you shoot and you're in the zone, you really feel like you are not the one doing this. Mm-hmm. Somebody else is doing it. Mm-hmm. And then in 2012, I had what I believe Advaita or other mystics call a unitive experience. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I told you 2 years ago. That's mm-hmm. what brought me here 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm. And what has the impact been of that unitive experience in your life?
Well, I've since started working with Vedanta and meditating.
I see. When you say working with Vedanta,
well, reading the scriptures, you know, the canon, the Gita, the Upanishads, the Brahma Sutra.
Uh-huh. And what has that yielded for you to?
Oh, it's very much enriched my life, simplified my life.
Uh-huh.
I was very, very busy before, and I still am busy because I'm the medical director of, so I do two things. I'm a psychiatrist and I'm a psychoanalyst, but in my psychiatric work, I'm the medical director of about 70 doctors. So I'm very busy.
Right. Yeah.
So I do both clinical and admin work, and admin work is a whole nother monster. It's a whole different mm-hmm. skill set.
Sure.
So what it's done for my life is it seems to have made me, in some way that I could not do before, simplify my life. Simplify what matters anyway, mm-hmm. and seem to understand things at a more basic level, and not to get too worried about getting in the weeds or getting upset or anxious about things that really won't matter tomorrow or next week.
Uh-huh.
But they seem to before. You know, everything is, especially in the admin world, everything is an urgency.
Yes.
But it's not, in fact, not the case. And you know, so it's helped me that way. And again, it's made my life very simple with my wife, mm-hmm. my dogs, work, and then this.
Mm-hmm. At that time, did we talk about my concept of the sense of personal authorship?
Yes, and I've either read about it a lot in your website or other places as well. Mm-hmm. So I have a fairly good understanding of that, I think.
Uh-huh. Because as you're talking, what arises for me is that as this sense of personal authorship diminishes, then the anxiety, the tension that accompanies being busy, and having a lot of things happening dissipates. I mean, that there is a stripping away of a whole level of involvement in both the results and future results and past action. When there isn't this claim of personal responsibility for either the past actions or the future results, then you're freed to be present and to react in the moment in accordance with your obvious skills, because you don't get to the position you're in where you're administering 70 people without having skills. And so what we often talk about as being in the zone is, as far as in my definition, the way I talk about it and think about it, is the absence of that overlay of personal authorship.
Yeah, and it does seem like what's happened the last couple of years is that even just basic things are much more fulfilling now. I mean, simple things like just really making it. I mean, this is going to sound so stupid and cliche, but I really don't care because it seems to really matter. Is making an effort to get up and see the sunset, or making it like, and then when I go home, since I am the medical director, I can leave when I want. I make a point of leaving when I know I can park at this certain spot where I can see the sunset.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to really, really make a difference in the quality of my life in a way that it did not when I was 20 or 30 or as a teen.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to think it was kind of silly when I would read about people, like one person comes to mind, there's a singer, Natalie Merchant. And when I was 20, she would talk, I would read about her when she was with this band, and when she would go on vacation, she would annoy certain people in the band because she was trying to get them to get up at 4 to go chase sunsets and all that. What a silly, stupid thing to do. But I don't really, it seems like such an obvious, pleasurable thing to do now.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a resonance with it that wasn't there before.
Mm-hmm. And I'm going to guess that in those times where you don't get yourself up to go see the sunset, that there is now an absence of beating yourself up about it.
Yes and no. I mean, I'm nowhere near where I need to be on this journey. So I do still feel guilty about it from time to time.
Uh-huh.
But sometimes, yeah, I don't beat myself up about it, but sometimes I do. But not like I might have at another time in my life.
Mm-hmm. And whereabouts do you live and work? Whereabouts do you live and work?
I live in Beverly Hills. My private practice, which is a psychoanalytic practice, where, that's the whole Freudian thing, right? Even though I'm not really a Freudian, I'm what they call a Kleinian, which is a different school. But that's where I do that work. But then my other work as an administrator for all these doctors, it's actually a gigantic. My office is in South Central LA, but we service 22 clinics in 3 counties in LA that serve the low socioeconomic, seriously mentally ill population.
Uh-huh.
So I'm kind of at 2 spots.
Mm-hmm. That must be challenging work.
Well, the patient, what I'm finding at the moment in my life is what's more challenging than patients and suicidal patients and these kinds of things and suicides is administrating. It's a whole new monster dealing with these doctors, and they're mostly doctors that I'm the ones in charge of.
Uh-huh.
And because they're very, very smart people, and
Uh-huh.
they're not at all behaving selflessly.
Right.
So it's very challenging.
Uh-huh.
I mean, they're not behaving the way that we would have, like what this is all about.
Right.
Very, what did you call it, false sense of authorship?
Yep.
They're highly, highly in tune with that and their ego,
Mm-hmm.
and trying to get their needs met.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what's really most challenging in my life at the moment. I don't get too stressed at all by the patient care because I've been doing that for 20, 25 years.
Right.
It's really this other part.
Mm-hmm. So when you came today, did you have anything specific in mind?
Yeah, I did. I started meditating 1 year ago.
Mm-hmm. What kind of meditation do you do?
Nothing other than, it assumes whether I can't really get into the lotus position because of my body habitus and my hamstring. So I have one of those little benches, the little meditation benches. And I don't do much other than, close my eyes and then do 9 ohms and then the 5 series of the pranayamas. And then I have my eyes closed and I just wait.
Mm-hmm.
Wait for it. Whatever. I don't really have anything I wait for.
Mm-hmm.
I did was able to create what I call a chapel in my home. My home has this weird turret in it, and it's got 3 stories to this turret. So I turned the 3rd story of the turret into a chapel, and that's where I go. The thing, I guess, why I came today is, so I started 1 year ago in October, so it's a little over a year. Starting in July, I started seeing lights in meditation. And then it progressed to what I understand is what is called the blue pearl. I could explain that further if that terminology isn't
The
clear.
terminology does not mean anything to me.
It's something that Siddha yogas I read now. It's something that, and then the Kashmir, I forget the second.
Shaivism.
Yeah, and there's another group of these people. I think it's a Southern India thing that they focus more on this, or they write about it anyway. But there's a series of lights, but what ultimately happens with the blue pearl is there's a cloud or a disc of blue that very much comes out into the visual field, and then a light goes into the middle of it and starts twinkling, dancing, moving back and forth, approaching you, receding. And then at times the light explodes, and then there is a universe that you can see. And then it kind of retracts back into itself, and then it starts all over again. And this started happening in July, and it happens every single time that there's not a time that it does not happen. Sometimes it's as soon as I close my eyes, but usually it will start at about 5 to 10 minutes. At one point, when it initially started, as anybody would do, I think, they would probably go hog wild meditating, and I was meditating for 3 hours at a stretch. But I was able to rein that in, and now I just remain at about 40, 45 minutes. And so it happens this morning. There's not a day that it doesn't happen, and it's always around. So I was just coming to talk about that a little bit.
And what is the significance of that for you?
Well, one of the things that initially started to happen was my work with patients. I noticed when I was not the administrator, but because I still see patients. And patients, I did mention a moment ago that administration is the pain in my butt at the moment, but patients can be a pain in the butt too. They certainly can be. And a doctor is going to feel aggravated, you know. What I noticed was it was very, very much helping that. And what I would tend to do when a patient who I knew was going to be aggravating would come into the room, I would tell myself, just see that light between us. Just pretend that light's there, and everything's going to be okay. Or there's no reason to be upset. What is there to be aggravated about? This is a person who's suffering, or blah, blah, blah. So it had that effect initially, where stressful situations with human beings, it seemed to play some part. And then one last thing, there's a new development to answer your question, which has been going on for about a month and a half or a month, which is, I told you, the sunsets and the sunrises, and even the moon gazing is very important to me. The blue color now comes in the sunset. I can see the blue color in real life, surrounding the sunset, surrounding the sunrise, and surrounding the moon. This blue pillow, this blue pillow of light that's around the twinkling light in meditation, it is now in the sunset in real life, around the sunset, the moon, and it's actually and also the morning star, or whatever that one is in the morning, if it's Venus or some other star. But there's that star you can always see when you can't see anything else. The blue disc circles that, and I'm talking about waking life. So that's really what I came to talk to you about, because I don't have a full understanding about it all. It doesn't seem to me to be anything other than a positive thing. I'm a psychiatrist, I'm a psychoanalyst, I know I'm not going crazy, I'm 100% certain about that. I know that it's something spiritual, because I know there's the history. I've read the books from the Siddhas and some of it from the Kashmir, so I know that this has been going on for hundreds of years, and they write about it. So you could see why I make myself get up to see the sun rise, and I leave work to see the sunset, because I want to see this thing. And I told my wife about it uh, when it first started in August. I think we were in New York City, and I was debating whether to tell her about it because I thought she would think, and she's not on this path with me. So I thought, and she's a psychiatrist too. And so I was just, I was a little worried about what she would think. But she handled it very, very well. I mean, she was most interested in whether it was having a beneficial effect on my life, more than anything.
Yeah.
And so I told her what I told you right now, and she was happy enough about that. And I think she was particularly happy that I told her, I think it's helping me with our relationship, between the two of us, that I think it's helping me reduce stress and, between the two, she and I. So that, I imagine that would make anybody happy, so.
Yeah. And I mean, I have no experience whatsoever with what you're talking about, other than some very interesting drug experiences I had, over the years, in which there was light phenomenon and universes opening and, I mean, things like that. So I've certainly had various kinds of experiences, but that particular one, and with that kind of regularity, I've never had that experience myself. But in hearing you talk, it seems to me that this is kind of a what I would consider to be a blessing.
It seems to me. I mean, I'm happy. I look forward to it. One of my friends, I think you know him, Arshdeep. He's been here throughout the years. But I know you see a lot of people.
Yeah.
But
I don't recognize the name.
He asked me, does it frighten you, or does it? And I said, no. It's simply like the sun rising. It's there all the time for me. I expect it to be there because it's been there so regularly now, without fault. But when the first thing you asked me, the reason why I brought up the zone when I was a high school basketball player, it just seems like I wondered if maybe certain personalities have certain portals for these mystical kind of experiences. It's just because it seemed to have begun with me at an early age with sports, and then there was that unitive experience in 2012.
My observation is that people are different, and some are much more open and receptive than others.
Yeah, and one other example, I guess, of what I wonder about is when we were in training in residency in psychiatry, they actually still do train you to hypnotize.
Right.
And there's 6 levels of a hypnotee. There's the number 1 level are the really obstinate people who cannot be hypnotized at all. And usually it's a personality thing. They're so obsessional, they can't give over control. But then there's level 4, 5, and 6, which they call somnambules. And that means that the hypnotizer can get you to negatively hallucinate is 5, and 6 is positively hallucinate. So I'll define what that means. Let's say I were hypnotizing you. A negative hallucination would mean this: I could make this room disappear, and you would not see anybody in the room.
Right.
And a positive hallucination is I could make you see something you want to see that's not in the room.
Right.
So I was at level 5. They actually didn't get me to level 6, the hypnotizer. So he was pretty struck by that he said, I never really encountered a level 5 before. So that's why I wondered is there just something about my personality that's open to this, or my body-mind mechanism, right, in some way?
I would say that that's quite obvious that is the case. Because we experience in accordance with our nature. And so what you're describing is a kind of nature in which these phenomena occur. And you and everybody else, who has experienced themselves and others, can identify that what you're describing is different from what most people experience.
Is it just Maya, though? That's what I read. It's just Maya, though, right? I mean...
Well, Maya has kind of a bad rap, as far as I'm concerned. Well, it's just Maya. which is kind of like saying it's just the fucking everything in the universe. It's just that. And I go, well, yeah, but this is all pretty amazing. And then even if you say this is Maya, the question is, where does Maya come from? What is the nature? Where does Maya appear? You see. So I'm firmly in the camp of that which is often called Maya is totality, essence, God, unity, oneness, totality in expression. As a non-dualist, they're not two things. That's the essence of what this teaching is about, and which my understanding is that they're not two.
That's the way I like to look at it, but I just read things now and then, and I think, okay, and I wonder, like you say, there's that kind of pejorative sense sometimes associated with Maya, depending on who the commentator is you're reading. Yeah.
Yes, and always in religions and in Scripture, there are multiple interpretations and multiple ways of, talking about things and looking at them and understanding them. So the Scriptures themselves have their roots in a fundamental understanding, but the way that they're expressed and the way that they're interpreted and the commentaries are all over the map. So if you're reading, you are inevitably going to read an enormous amount of bullshit.
Lately, I've been trying just to stay with Shankara's interpretations of everything, or his commentaries on the canon, and just trying to stick with that so I don't get into this problem where two different people are saying the same thing about the same verse. Because he's the big Advaita Vedantist, right? Or one of them, anyway, right?
I'm woefully ignorant of the Scriptures.
How important is it, the Scriptures, as far as the path goes?
To me, it hasn't been important at all.
When
somebody else will report that it's absolutely been essential for them.
So your work with your guru, do you guys then work with the Scripture a lot?
No, not at all.
I had heard that about you. I mean, what you're saying, and I've wondered about it for a couple of years, because given that, I've just spent so much of my time in school, it's just something that suits me, right? And so I've wondered about you, what I've heard, and what you've just said, and how one goes through the path without the Scripture versus those that do.
Yeah. And my perspective is that there is no inherent truth in the Scriptures, and yet that inherent truth may well be revealed through the Scriptures. And there are numerous reports of people for whom that has happened. So there is something there. Now, whether you resonate with it and whether what is there is revealed to you, or what is also there, which is an enormous amount of misinformation and confusion, whether that is what resonates with you, who knows?
What I particularly like about the Vedanta Scripture is how you can find parallels with a lot of the work of the last 3,000 years, whether it's Plato, Aristotle, Spinoza, others, for me, I like that, correlating the different thought. And there's a lot of crossover with the Hindu scripture and all the great thinkers, it seems. So it seems to me like people, the great minds, are saying, yeah, I agree with that. I think that too, over the centuries. And particularly Spinoza is a great example. He's a Jew from about 1580 or something like that who got ostracized because of his radical beliefs. So the Jewish population ostracized him, and he wrote a book called Ethics about his conception of God. And it's got a weird name called Ethics, even though it's this formulation of what God is. And I think it's called Ethics because at the very end of the book, he tries to show you how you can use this information to lead a better life. And what's interesting about it is two things. It's very similar to Vedanta. It's very similar to the Upanishads. And what's the second most interesting thing about it is, Einstein wasn't an atheist. People tend to misunderstood him, and many, many times he had to tell people he wasn't an atheist. And at one conference, somebody said to him, "Can you explain your conception of God?" And what Einstein said was, "It really hasn't been my work to elaborate that." He goes, "But if you want to read the best conception I've ever read of God, it's Spinoza." So I think it's interesting that Einstein says that, and it's very similar, in my mind, to Vedanta.
I was curious about something else. I heard you say that spiritual seeking is usually characterized by so-called flip-flops, the experiences of periods of involvement and periods of experiences of unity. And the seeker usually imagines that for the sage, the experience of the sage is that permanent like, experience of unity without the flip side or flop side, which wasn't the case. And I heard you say that for the sage it's a completely different paradigm. I was wondering if you could talk a little more about the difference of the paradigm of the sage, how it is different from the experience of unity of a seeker. And also, do seekers have glimpses of those sage paradigms, so to speak, in their day-to-day lives?
Yeah. The simple answer to that question is no. I can't.
So basically, the seeker doesn't get any glimpses of that kind of paradigm of the sage, right?
No, I can't answer the question.
Oh,
Not that no, the seeker doesn't. It's that the way that the question is conceived, I can't answer it.
okay, all right. And again, it's based on curiosity, of course, again, and that futile attempt to grasp it with the...
There is the most natural kind of attempt to grasp it and understand it. I totally get it. And the difficulty inherent in these pointers is that that which is being pointed at can't be grasped.
Yeah.
question. So I heard you say before that there's a purpose for this. It's to alleviate suffering, or that's part of
Well, that is my desire.
desire.
Yes.
So I feel like I share that desire, and this experience that you talked about as a personal sense of authorship starts to diminish, there's less worry, less concern, less anxiety. I've definitely been experiencing that
Mm-hmm.
in the past 3 or 4 months, certainly.
Mm-hmm.
And when I first came here, like I think in June, had a lot to say, and then things got really quiet for a few months, which was great. I just felt super relieved to have things get so quiet.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess recently I have a lot of clients I'm working with
Mm-hmm.
around this desire to relieve suffering and sort of addressing trauma. Kind of curious about, like, do you think there's specific things that block people from being able, that create stuckness for people, like trauma potentially that fuels addiction, and I'm curious about how that sort of relates to what I see in the world, which is a lot of trauma, a lot of people being arrested for molestation and abuse and all these sort of things. It feels like there's a big addressing of trauma and like for me, it's about sort of guiding people to their breath, to presence, to love, to acceptance, to, I don't know, heal and resolve that. And I wonder if that's potentially a requirement or something that contributes to people being able to access these things that you're talking about here. That to be able to come to know themselves in a more expansive way and not be totally absorbed in their own personal trauma.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean it's not a paradigm that I'm familiar with working in. Trauma. The notion of trauma and how it, defining it and applying it. It's not something that I personally have as part of the way I talk about things. So I can't relate it specifically to what I do talk about. I can only talk about what I talk about. So if you find what you get here is helpful for you in your work, please, I'm delighted that it helps facilitate that which you are doing.
Yeah, I guess the question what I'm asking my own self is are there specific things that block people from realization? And are there specific things that contribute toward people being able to have a healing experience or have a resolution or release?
I think that you can formulate a therapy, by identifying a condition and then come up with means to eliminate that condition. And I mean, and there are many of them. This is one step back from that process. So what we're talking about here is non-specific to, you know, particular things being obstacles or particular things being facilitators in themselves. The approach of the teaching is that virtually anything can be an obstacle, or anything else, or anything can be a facilitator. So, I mean, some people, it is through some kind of trauma that they open up. The trauma knocks out their standard way of looking at things, you know, and opens up all new possibilities. For others, the trauma stops them dead in their tracks. And they can't get past the trauma. I mean, the trauma is the trauma, and the trauma becomes their whole life, and everything is filtered through the trauma. So that's
So I don't need to figure it out. You just need to surrender and let it happen. It's happening anyways.
well, yeah. You need to do
Right.
what you do,
Yeah.
clearly. And so if that has a positive effect and a positive impact on you and others, I'm delighted. And if it has a negative impact on you and others, I'm sad to see that. I truly don't have a formula for what is particularly effective in a generalized way and what's ineffective in a generalized way.
I always got the sense that like healing consciousness was that you were present with people in whatever they were going through, but you also kind of knew the truth, which is that there's a part of them that's not going through that. You know, it's like Jesus kind of healed people because he saw the truth about them. He wasn't judging based on just the appearance of what was happening with them, but he like saw the Christ consciousness in them too, or you know what I mean? That was really felt to me like if you're gonna be doing healing work, that's what it's really about. Yet you don't tell the hungry homeless dude, you know, you're God, so what's your problem? You know what I mean? You give him a sandwich or whatever you do. But is that kind of your experience? Do you kind of see people where they are, but you're not worried or concerned about it? You're not.
I don't have an agenda for you.
Yes.
And by that I mean, my hope is that things work out well for you. My hope is that you derive benefit from being here, from being alive, from that your existence is generally a positive experience. That's my hope. But I don't feel that it is in any way my job or responsibility or to make that happen, or that it's even possible to do so. I don't have that power. So any healing or insight or anything that takes place is a happening rather than my author doing. And that's if there is a consciousness which is here, that is the consciousness which is here.
Do you feel like that consciousness like moves through you?
No,
No.
that consciousness is here.
It's here. Got it. Mm. Mm.
noticing a lot of things happening in unison lately.
In unison.
Yeah, maybe past year or so. And it's just increasing the sense that there's unseen connections between everything.
Mm-hmm.
And they seem too precise, and in my gut, it just feels like it's not coincidental that people just happen to raise their hands at the exact same time, scratch the exact same place. That I happen to take this exhale with the exact same duration of the exact same type at the exact same time as someone else sighs out. And I think it's pretty incredible.
Mm-hmm.
And there's just a lot more going on than we're aware of, I think.
I think that is a very safe statement.